At 4:11 a.m. Eastern on a Tuesday, a wire transfer settled in 17 seconds between a Tier 1 bank in Singapore and a custodian in Zurich. No press release, no filing, no announcement. The instrument used to settle that transfer was XRP, and the wallet it cleared through belongs to a counterparty that did not exist as a registered crypto entity 90 days ago. That single transaction tells you more about where this market is going than every headline written this month combined. Most viewers will never hear about it. The ones who do will not understand what they're looking at. Because the story circulating right now, the Atkins comment, the Capitol Hill stablecoin fight, the Circle and Coinbase drawdowns, is being read as three disconnected events. It is not three events. It is one event in three forms, visible only from a specific altitude. Welcome back. This is The Calm Analyst. Today we pull back the curtain on what is actually being constructed in the settlement layer of global finance, why XRP sits at the exact center of that construction, and why the institutional behavior you are seeing this quarter is the opposite of what the price chart is telling you. This is not financial advice. This is a structural briefing. Do your own research before making financial decisions. If this kind of depth is useful to you, hit the like button. It directly affects how many people this analysis reaches. Let us begin. Let us start with the hard truth. 95% of people watching XRP right now are staring at the wrong layer of the market. They are watching the price chart. They are watching daily volume. They are reading sentiment threads. None of those signals describe what is actually happening to XRP in 2026. To understand the opportunity that is formed in front of you, you have to first understand a mechanism that retail investors are almost never shown. It is called settlement layer migration, and it is the most consequential financial infrastructure shift since the move from paper certificates to electronic book entry settlement in the 1970s. Here is what it means in plain language. Every major financial institution in the world, every bank, every custodian, every clearinghouse, runs on settlement rails. These rails are the plumbing that moves value between counterparties after a trade is agreed. They are slow, they are expensive, they settle in days, not seconds, and they sit on top of infrastructure that in some cases has not been meaningfully upgraded since the 1980s. What Paul Atkins confirmed this month is not a price opinion. It is the operational status of a project most retail investors have never heard of, the DTCC NASDAQ Tokenized Settlement Pilot. The Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation processes roughly $100 trillion in securities annually. NASDAQ adds another $60 trillion. Combined, you are looking at $160 trillion in annual trade volume that is now being actively migrated toward blockchain-based settlement. That migration does not happen on a single chain. It happens across a constellation of purpose-built settlement assets. And XRP, designed from inception as a neutral bridge asset for cross-border value transfer, is not competing for a seat at that table. It was architected for the table itself. This is the part the retail crowd is missing. XRP's behavior in 2026 is not the behavior of a speculative token. It is the behavior of an infrastructure asset in the early phase of institutional integration. Infrastructure assets do not pump on news cycles. They accumulate quietly, drain from exchanges, move into custodial vaults, and reprice in step changes when integration milestones complete. If you have been frustrated watching the chart while reading headlines that should have moved it, this is your answer. You are not wrong about what the headlines mean. You are simply watching the wrong layer for evidence. Let us do the math that the retail crowd refuses to sit with. XRP has a fixed supply cap of 100 billion tokens. That number does not move. Roughly 55 to 57 billion are in circulation. The remainder sits in escrow, released in 1 billion token monthly tranches, with the overwhelming majority relocked and never reaching the open market. Now overlay the demand side. Global cross-border payments represent approximately $150 trillion in annual flow. The foreign exchange market clears roughly $7.5 trillion per day. The derivatives market, the largest financial market on Earth, sits at an estimated $1.2 quadrillion in notional value. And approximately $27 trillion is locked at any given moment in pre-funded nostro vostro accounts simply to enable cross-border settlement under the current legacy system. If XRP captures even 1/4% of cross-border payment flow as a settlement instrument, you are talking about $375 billion in annual transactional throughput, moving through a fixed supply of fewer than 60 billion liquid tokens. Think about that ratio. Think about what it requires. Here is the part that makes the math irreducible. As an asset is used more frequently for settlement, two things happen simultaneously. First, the price per token must rise to keep transaction sizes practical. You cannot move a $100 million settlement through a fractional cent asset without catastrophic slippage. Second, the available float must compress because settlement assets are held by custodians, not traded on retail exchanges. This is not a prediction. It is a design requirement. If XRP becomes what its architecture indicates it was built to become, the price level it must reach to function efficiently as institutional settlement infrastructure is not a Moonboy fantasy. It is a mathematical floor. If you have a problem with this logic, you do not have a problem with this channel. You have a problem with the laws of supply, liquidity, and settlement mechanics. And here is the closing math nobody is doing publicly. Daily transaction burn on the XRP ledger removes a tiny fraction of supply per transaction. At current usage, the burn is negligible. At institutional settlement volume, even at 1% of cross-border flow, the burn rate becomes structurally significant within a multi-year window. Combine that with custodial lockup, ETF wrapper accumulation, and corporate treasury allocation, and the liquid float available to retail markets in 2028 looks materially different from the float available today. While retail investors are debating whether the chart will hold a certain level this week, the institutional signal has never been louder. You simply have to know where to look. Look at Ripple's acquisition pattern over the last 24 months. The Hidden Road acquisition gave Ripple direct exposure to prime brokerage infrastructure used by hedge funds and institutional traders. The G Treasury acquisition extended Ripple's reach into corporate treasury management, the function inside every multinational that decides which assets sit on the balance sheet and how cross-border liquidity is managed. These are not crypto acquisitions. These are financial infrastructure acquisitions. A company does not assemble this stack to serve a speculative retail market. Look at the ETF flow data. Spot crypto ETF approvals over the past 2 years have demonstrated something that should have ended the institutions don't want crypto debate permanently. When a compliant wrapper exists, capital flows in measured in billions within weeks. Multiple XRP ETF filings are now active. The approval pathway, under a reconstituted SEC, is no longer adversarial. It is procedural. Ask yourself this brutal question. Does a trillion-dollar asset manager like BlackRock build out a digital asset division, hire compliance officers, file ETF applications, and publicly describe current crypto valuations as reasonable entry multiples without absolute conviction in where this market is going? They do not gamble. They position. And the positioning is now visible in filings, in flow data, and in custodial infrastructure buildouts that take quarters to construct. Look at the regulatory chessboard. Japan's Financial Services Agency has moved to reclassify digital assets under a framework that explicitly accommodates settlement instruments. The Digital Asset Clarity Act in the United States, despite the public theater on Capitol Hill, is being negotiated in active working sessions between Senate banking, the White House, and industry. Parties who intend to walk away from a negotiation do not negotiate for 2 months. They walk. Look at central bank signaling. The IMF has openly discussed multi-asset reserve frameworks. The Federal Reserve, under a chair navigating one of the most complex liquidity environments in modern history, has stopped treating digital assets as a fringe topic. These signals do not move prices on the day they are issued. They move institutional allocation committees in the quarters that follow. This is not retail FOMO. This is the calm, methodical positioning of custodians, market makers, and sovereign-adjacent entities who have looked at the same architecture I am describing to you now and reached the same conclusion. They are not waiting for the chart to confirm the thesis. They are accumulating before the chart can. Let us map the specific catalysts now visible on the timeline. The first is the Clarity Act. Whether it passes in its current form, in amended form, or stalls into 2027, the legislative intent is already on record. The SEC posture under Atkins is already set. Enforcement discretion fills any gap created by legislative delay. The worst-case scenario is a timing slip, not a reversal. The most likely outcome is committee progress within the next several weeks, with floor action before the political calendar collapses into midterm season. The second catalyst is XRP ETF approval. The procedural pathway is open. The institutional appetite is documented. The compliance infrastructure is built. What remains is regulatory process, measured in months, not years. When approval lands, the institutional capital that is currently sitting in decision phase pipelines moves into deployment phase pipelines. That transition is not instantaneous. It is 6 to 12 weeks of compliance approval, custodial setup, mandate review, and board authorization. The price spike you will see on the day of approval is retail. The sustained inflow that follows is institutional. The third catalyst is the continued expansion of the DTCC Nasdaq Tokenized Settlement Framework. Atkins has explicitly described 2026 as the year the SEC lays the foundation for broad acceptance of digital asset products. That is the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission describing a multi-year infrastructure build-out that he intends to complete on his watch. That is not a bull thesis. That is a roadmap. The fourth catalyst is corporate treasury adoption. The conditions that previously prevented public companies from holding digital assets on their balance sheets, accounting treatment, custody risk, regulatory ambiguity, have been resolved one by one over the past 18 months. The treasury management function is the largest dormant pool of demand in this market. When these catalysts arrive, and they are arriving sequentially, not simultaneously, the wait-and-see capital becomes deployed capital. The window between catalyst announcement and capital deployment is the window the informed investor positions inside. We are moving from an era of abundance to an era of scarcity in this asset. Understand what that means structurally. When a token enters a multi-signature institutional vault, it does not return to the open market for a 10% profit. It does not return for a 50% profit. It returns only when the institution's mandate requires rebalancing, and rebalancing horizons for infrastructure allocations are measured in years, not months. Every token absorbed into custodial infrastructure is functionally removed from the float available to retail. Exchange reserves of XRP have been compressing for multiple quarters. The trajectory is not subtle. The tokens leaving exchanges are not being sold. They are being moved into custody. On-chain forensic data from sources like Glassnode and CryptoQuant confirms the pattern. Whale wallet accumulation is sustained. Retail float is compressing. The visible float on exchanges is approaching levels that, in any other asset class, would be described as illiquid. There is a phase ahead, and I want you to sit with this, where buying whole XRP tokens at the prices retail is accustomed to will no longer be available. Not because of a single dramatic move, but because of the cumulative effect of float compression meeting institutional integration. The market will move from a unit-priced asset to a fractional asset for most retail participants. That transition has happened before in other assets, and it is rarely reversed. The institutions have spent 4 years engineering the conditions for retail to exit. The Gensler-era litigation, the FUD cycles, the headline-driven volatility, these were not coincidences. They were the noise required to shake conviction loose so that custodial accumulation could happen at favorable cost basis. Whether you accept that framing or not, the observable result is the same. The float that was in retail hands 4 years ago is materially smaller today, and the float in custodial hands is materially larger. The door is not closed, but it is closing. And the people who will look back on this period as the obvious window are the ones who understood the mechanism before the chart confirmed it. I know the conditions feel difficult right now. I know the chart has tested patience for longer than seems reasonable. I know the headlines this week, the Capitol Hill chaos, the Circle drop, the Coinbase drawdown, have created the kind of background anxiety that erodes conviction over time. Let me reframe what you are looking at. Red candles in this phase are not weakness. They are the surface texture of a market in which informed capital is accumulating against uninformed capital that is exhausted. FUD cycles are not threats. They are the psychological infrastructure required to transfer assets from weak hands to strong hands at favorable prices. The boredom you feel watching sideways action is not absence of movement. It is the silence of accumulation. Being early in this market feels almost identical to being wrong, right up until the moment the structure resolves and the chart catches up to what the architecture already finished building. That gap between the structural completion and the chart confirmation is the entire alpha available to the informed retail investor. Institutions do not capture it because they cannot move fast enough. You can. The question is not whether the price will recover. The question is whether you will still be holding when the levels that look ambitious today become the floors that institutional allocators defend tomorrow. This is the conviction test, and it is not designed to be comfortable. History does not reward comfort. It rewards the people who paid attention when the room was quiet. Let me give you the structural summary one final time in the cleanest possible form. XRP is not a speculative token in 2026. It is settlement infrastructure in the integration phase. The price action you are watching is the surface of a market in which $160 trillion in annual settlement volume is being migrated onto rails that XRP was architecturally designed to operate. The institutional accumulation is visible on-chain. The regulatory posture has reversed. The catalysts are sequential, not simultaneous. The window between architectural completion and price confirmation is the window the informed investor occupies. Price is the distraction. Structure is the reality. If you made it to the end of this briefing, drop the word structure in the comments. I want to see how many of you actually understand what you just watched, because the comment section is one of the few places I can measure whether this analysis is reaching the audience it was built for. Subscribe so the next breakdown, the moment the Clarity Act text drops, the moment ETF flows shift, the moment the next architectural milestone completes, reaches you before it reaches the headlines. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. The 17-second transaction I opened this briefing with was not an anomaly. It was a preview. The institutions are not waiting for the future. They are building it.